The world's richest race is this weekend over in Saudi Arabia. Let's preview the Saudi Cup. Salutations and welcome, horse racing fans. I'm your host for this Trust the Prophet Stake preview. My name is Matthew DeSantis, and you can find me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. As I mentioned, we are going to be previewing the Grade 1 Saudi Cup that is taking place this Saturday. Now, it is taking place in the evening over in Saudi Arabia, but it's going to take place around 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday afternoon if you're watching here in the United States. But before we get to all that, just a quick reminder to make sure to subscribe to Trust the Prophets here on YouTube. We have a ton of content. If this is your first video you're watching on Trust the Prophets, we have so much content focused on the Kentucky Derby Trail, focused on graded stakes previews, so much different racetracks, so many different races. A lot of fun. So make sure to throw us a subscription there. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. And like I said, we just got a lot for you, including this big stakes preview. So obviously, with the world's richest race, we have several horses that are American interests, if you will, including two Bob Baffert horses. There are several very well-known Japanese horses. There are some local horses from Saudi Arabia that are going to be running in this race. Very interesting dynamic, a 13-horse field just drawn on Wednesday. And let's just dive right into this race a little bit and talk about it. And so this is an 1,800-meter race, which roughly translates to about a mile and an eighth for 4-year-olds and up. As I mentioned, it is the most lucrative race in horse racing, $20 million at stake, $10 million going to the winning horse. And of course, if you remember back to last year, this was a race won by an entry this year again, Emblem Road, who won at a huge price last year. Country Grammar coming in second. Midnight Bourbon, may he rest in peace, one of my favorite horses, finishing third. It's important to remember a couple of other American interests over there last year. Mandaloon and Art Collector finished much further back. So this edition of the race, I think, is quite interesting. You see the 13-horse field. Now, you're going to notice on the left-hand side of the graphic, you're going to see two different sets of numbers. One is the number of the horse. The other is their post position. This has caused some confusion, and it usually does when these things happen, particularly for American audiences who are not accustomed to seeing this. So the horse is assigned a number, but then a post position is different from the horse's number on their saddle cloth. So, for instance, Panthalassa is in the inside post, but is number 7. Okay. Cafe Pharoah is number 1, but actually on the far outside post of 13. So just something to keep in mind when you're looking at this graphic. But like I said, you see the 13-horse field here. You see the two Bob Baffert entries with Taiba and Country Grammar. But American racing fans should be familiar with the Koichi Shintani horse, Crown Pride, because of course this is a horse that ran last year in the Kentucky Derby, was part of that very aggressive early pace in that race, but a winner of the UAE Derby prior to that. And you see a few other horses. Like I said, Emblem Road is a horse a lot of people know about. Cafe Pharoah is a horse a lot of people know about, 2-time winner of the February Stakes. So very accomplished horse for a great trainer over there in Japan. But let's talk about this field a little bit and what dynamics we might end up seeing in this race. The first thing that really pops out to me is Taiba being the early odds favorite. And I should say these are early odds that we're getting from overseas betting markets right now. So obviously there's going to be fluctuation between now and post time. These aren't the official morning line odds by any stretch. But like I said, this is what we're seeing in overseas betting markets. Taiba right now, the 7-4 overwhelming favorite in this field. But I'll be honest, I don't love the post position for Taiba, and it's because of the way the race shapes up. Panthalassa, who's on the inside, has a ton of early speed and is going to dictate the pace in this race. Now, it should be pointed out, Panthalassa is not a horse I think will necessarily beat there at the end. He's won in Maidan, so he certainly can ship, but is a little bit more of a turf horse. Does like this distance of essentially 9 furlongs or 1,800 meters. I wouldn't necessarily think he's a good win candidate, but he can really mess things up for Taiba to some extent because he can show that speed. Taiba, pretty well known, is not the biggest fan of getting kickback. Now, has gotten better with that, but here's the problem. Crown Pride directly to Taiba's outside is also a horse that will flash early speed. Okay. So now you have two horses on both sides of Taiba flashing speed. Taiba may get shuffled back maybe a little further than he wants. So I think it's just something to pay attention to. The post position of the Taiba being in the two hole, maybe not that advantageous that you have speed on both sides. And next thing you know, you realize you're now sitting mid pack or a little further back in a 13 horse field. Maybe that's not where you want to be. Obviously, Mike Smith, I think, did a great job at a race like the Pennsylvania Derby, getting him to calm down, rate a little bit, and take kickback on the inside in particular and not have it be too much of a problem. That was something we saw as an issue when Tabor ran on the Haskell. So he is a horse that's maturing. He's got a lot of credentials, obviously, as a worthy early favorite, perhaps, but I do think there's just some potential complications with that post position having speed both to the inside and the outside. Well, speaking to the speed of the outside, let's talk about Crown Pride a little bit. Like I said, everybody remembers him from the Kentucky Derby, but this is a very legitimately good horse. Won the UAE Derby last year to qualify for the Kentucky Derby, has recorded 3 consecutive second place finishes leading up to this. Now, on one hand, you'd say, well, he's in pretty good form. He's obviously running well, but it's also a little bit worrisome in that he has a little bit of seconditis, perhaps. And the real kicker is the last time out was in a grade one over in Japan, lost to another entry in this race, John Lightbolt. The Tomomichi horse. So that's something to keep in mind, that Crown Pride hasn't even been necessarily beating some of these other horses that are in this field from Japan. So something to keep in mind. Even though he's a big name, I'm sure he's going to attract a little bit of attention here from American audiences. Again, early speed could be interesting here to see how this all plays out. Let's identify a few other horses, and let's talk a little bit more about Taiba. 4 for 7 winning. Only one time in his career was off the board, and that was at the Kentucky Derby, which was a huge ask to run that race in his third career start. So, to some extent, a lot of times I think most of us can draw a line through the Kentucky Derby because it can be a very fluky race. It can be a race with some very anomalous results, one way or the other. And so, if you take that race out of Taiba's portfolio, I mean, this horse really hasn't done much wrong. And absolutely is a legitimately talented horse, probably one of our best 4-year-olds that we have here in the United States, one of our best older dirt horses now that's still around, has been working alongside Country Grammar. They've been clocking 2 7-furlong works at Santa Anita leading up to shipping over. So there's some very aggressive works from Bob Baffert, 125 and change 7-furlong works leading up to this. So they were really humming around the workout track there at Santa Anita leading up to this. And like I said, they were workout partners, both recorded the same times, working out alongside each other. So something to keep in mind in terms of what his work schedules look like. His last recorded work was February 12th. Prior to that. So always interesting to see, how does Taiba take to shipping over? Unlike his stablemate Country Grammar, he's never been outside of the United States. Now, speaking of Country Grammar, this is a horse that has not finished outside the exacta since August of 2020. Okay. In August 2020, I wasn't even living where I live right now. I didn't even have the same job I have right now. Lots happened in that time. And so amazingly, though, Country Grammar, like I said, has finished first or second in every single race since then. Does finish second, maybe a little bit more than first. So it's fair to ask whether or not he does have a little bit of seconditis, but I think it's not so much seconditis as much as he's just a grinder. This is not a horse that overwhelms you necessarily, but a horse that just keeps coming and coming and coming and just kind of gets closer and closer and closer as the race wears on. The more distance, the better. I think, I don't think it's a mistake that he finished second in this race last year, came back and won the UAE Derby. A little bit deeper there in Maidan, the dirt is, and really can kind of wear horses down a little bit in that 1.25 mile race. So I think he's a horse that likes a little bit more distance. I think 1.25 miles is probably his best distance, actually, but certainly very formidable, given that we know he can ship over. We know he can run well in this field. And again, very sharp workouts leading up to this race. So I think at 4-1, you're getting a much better value on this horse than Taiba, who I think there are some question marks about. I've already mentioned the post position. How does he ship? How does he take to the new surface and the new surroundings? Those are legitimate questions to ask. Well, let's talk about some other entries in the field. Let's talk about Scotland Yard. This is a really, I think, fascinating horse that is a United States horse, but has shipped and has kind of changed interests and is now running exclusively over in Saudi Arabia. And this is a horse that could not break his maiden to over in the United States, goes over to Saudi Arabia, not only breaks his maiden, then proceeds to win two essentially local stakes races over there in Saudi Arabia. And doing so in impressive fashion, actually just set the race record for the race he was in last time out at 2,000 meters, where he ran 2 minutes and 4 seconds in that race. So he can do the distance. That's not a question mark. I do wonder how the quality of Scotland Yard is, given that in the United States, this is a horse that finished ninth place in a maiden special weight to Creative Minister. Now, Creative Minister is a nice horse, but if you're not able to break your maiden against Creative Minister, now suddenly you're overseas and you're winning all these races. Maybe something happened with this horse. Maybe the light, the switch finally got turned on. You never know, but it's an intriguing dynamic there with Scotland Yard, this kind of local horse now that has really done a great job taking to the new settings that he's in. So you always have to take those new shooters seriously. And I would really encourage people to pay close attention to what these horses look like in the post parade. Last year, Emblem Road was a horse that looked amazing in the post parade, and he went and ran amazing. I would encourage you to do the same thing with Scotland Yard. If he looks good, that might tell you he's ready to roll. And maybe you should take him a little bit more seriously than 14-1 in terms of the early odds. Now let's talk about actually the third favorite in this race, John Lightbolt. This is a winner of 3 consecutive races in a row, including a grade 1 and a grade 3 over in Japan. I think he's absolutely in peak form. He's running his best races most recently. He looks great. I've seen some video of him over there. He looks like he's taken to the track. He looks to be in great spirits. He's, as a horse, he's kind of bopping around. He's looking lively. He's on his toes, but in a good way. You like what you see. I mean, granted, it was just a short video clip, but I liked what I saw out of him on the track, taking to the surface. I think that's really positive. Now, he has never shipped before, so that is a question mark. But like I said, everything about him right now looks very positive. So I do think there's a lot there. He is a little bit of an older horse, though. This is maybe an intriguing dynamic, who's just now starting to show that top form. So I think it's fair to wonder, maybe why is it taking him this long to finally start showing what he's doing? But it does seem like he's tapped into something at now 6 years old, and he's finally capable of really kind of running his best races. I think he's a very serious contender. 8-1 on the not the morning line, but 8-1 early odds. I think he's certainly a horse that presents a fair amount of value in this particular race. Like I said, coming in strong form, has beaten another horse in this race in Crown Pride, who a lot of people will take seriously. So a lot to like there with John Lightbolt. Now let's not short shrift last year's winner, Emblem Road, who, like I said, just looked amazing last year in the post parade. This is a horse that is 8 for 11 winning. Only 3 losses in this horse's career came on the turf, on a long layoff, and in debut. Those are the only 3 times this horse lost. Every other time this horse took to the track, he's won. There's something to be said for that. Now, a lot of times he doesn't run in a lot of stakes competition. He doesn't even run in a lot of these cup series that a horse like Scotland Yard ran in, these local races over there in Saudi Arabia. He runs in allowance level races. And that's why he was such a huge price last year, but clearly demonstrated the ability to step up and take on a very serious field last year and repel all and beat all of them. So a lot to like there with Emblem Road. Again, I think a horse to pay attention to. How does he look in the post parade? But, based upon what he did last year, certainly is noteworthy. He came back from a long layoff and won last time out in another allowance race. So, he got that prep in before this one. A lot of these horses don't necessarily run as often. And that's something I should mention about Scotland Yard, actually, going back a second. Scotland Yard this is his 3rd race of 2023 already. He ran on January 14th, January 28th, and now he's got about a month off, but he ran 2 very strong races back to back, won both of them. So he can, this again, a horse that's in top form perhaps over there is one to take seriously. Another horse I'll just mention very quickly, Vindegard, has not run since May of 2022. He's more of a turf horse, but it's not uncommon to see turf horses run in the Saudi Cup because of the purse money. He's run well in Maidan, so it's reasonable to assume that he's shipped well, and he'll be able to take to the new surroundings. Don't really view him as a strong candidate. Maybe some people like him underneath a little bit. Geoglyphy, I should say. Interesting horse. Long shot has been running against Graded Stakes Company, certainly, and is a grade one winner in his own right, though. Hasn't hit the board the last three times out. All of those were grade one races, the Hong Kong Cup, the Autumn Stakes, and the Japanese Derby. That said, hard for me to get too excited about Geoglyph based upon that recent form that you've seen. Now, I should point out, international jockey superstar Christophe Lemaire is taking the reins 16-1. So maybe you figure, hey, listen, I trust the jockey here to give this horse the right ride. This horse does have some races to run back to. So that might be something that interests you at a little bit of a bigger price. The final horse I'll highlight is Cafe Pharoah. This is a horse that does not run often, but is super dangerous when he does. Four-time graded stakes winner with two grade ones, coming off a win in October, in the October Stakes. Or I'm sorry, not in the October Stakes, but just a win in October. But in a non-graded stakes race that time. And distance might be a question. I think this horse is better at a mile. He's never shipped to Japan before. He now has the far outside post. He's very, very talented. He's a horse I really like a lot. I was really hoping he was actually going to come over to the United States last year because he won a Breeders' Cup win in your in race, the February Stakes. And I was hoping he was going to come over. He didn't. So we'll see what Cafe Pharoah ends up doing, but he's a very, very talented horse that if he had run in last week's February Stakes in Japan would have been the overwhelming favorite to win that race. So he, like I said, super talented. I don't think the post position does him a lot of favors, and I'm not entirely sure about the distance, but he has a lot of class to him, and is a horse that, like I said, always you have to take seriously because when he's on his A game, he is super impressive. So ultimately, how do I see the Saudi Cup playing out? Well, like I said, I'm a little bit worried about the way Taiba drew inside, has never been overseas before. I think those are just, legitimate questions to wonder. Obviously, Bob Baffert knows how to acclimate these horses to these new surroundings. He's done it before. Obviously, he's done it just last year with Country Grammar, who's back again. For me, looking at the early odds, hard for me to take any horse at 7-4 in a 13 horse field. I'm leaning more towards Country Grammar. I think this is a horse that, again, is just getting a little bit better over time. I like that he's got this experience at this track already. You got Frankie Dettori, who's been on a tear over at Santa Anita, just won 4 races on Saturday at Santa Anita, coming over and riding for Bob Baffert. Frankie is no stranger to these big time races over in the Middle East. I trust him on Country Grammar. 4-1, you're getting a little bit of a better price. I'm absolutely going to be using Jun Lightbolt, Scotland Yard, and Emblem Road underneath. I think those are horses I'm really interested in trying to capture a little bit of a price at. And I probably, if I were to extend this out to a trifecta, would probably be including a horse like Crown Pride in that as well. But like I said, I think Jun Lightbolt and Country Grammar, those are my top 2 picks. But like I said, for a little bit more of a price, Scotland Yard, interesting horse. Emblem Road has done it before. You're getting double-digit odds there. And so that makes it a little bit more appealing, I think. Cafe Pharoah, I want to like more, but the post position, and I just have some questions about distance. Not entirely sure there. But this should be, really setting up to be a great race. And we are going to have a live reaction and watch along to the Saudi Cup here on the Trust the Profits Network on Saturday afternoon. So make sure to tune back in for that. Like I said, make sure to subscribe to Trust the Profits on YouTube. Make sure to give me a follow on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. Until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, and I'm wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.